In the cold expanse of space, where silence reigned and countless stars bore witness to the secrets of the galaxy, one name was whispered with a mixture of awe and trepidation: the Zephyrins. Among the myriad species that populated the cosmos, the Zephyrins stood apart, shrouded in an enigmatic aura that both drew others near and held them at a fearful distance. It was not their technology or their vast fleets that commanded this respect, but rather the power held by their females, beings of extraordinary psychic abilities. These women could peer into minds, unravel thoughts, and project emotions with such intensity that few dared to approach, let alone connect with them. Stories circulated through spaceports and diplomatic halls, tales of those who had attempted to bridge the gap between species and paid the ultimate price. Minds shattered, lives extinguished, and alliances left in ruins, all because of the overwhelming force contained within the psyche of a Zephyrian female. And so, they were left isolated, revered from afar but untouched by the hand of another species. No one had ever succeeded in forming a bond with them, and no one seemed willing to try, until now. The Zephyrians, despite their formidable abilities, were a society built on delicate balance. Their world was a place where power and politics were deeply intertwined with psychic energy, and the females of their race were the linchpins of this structure. From the moment of their birth, Zephyrian females were groomed for leadership, their minds honed to harness the raw psychic force that flowed through their veins. They communicated with a silent language of thoughts and emotions, weaving complex webs of influence that stretched across their world and beyond. The males, though respected, held secondary roles in this hierarchy, often serving as advisors or envoys, but never the true wielders of power. The matriarchs, an ancient council of the most powerful females, ruled with an iron grip, their decisions shaped by visions and prophecies that only they could see. It was said that the matriarchs could turn the tide of an interstellar war with a mere thought, and that their psychic reach extended far beyond the boundaries of their planet, influencing events on distant worlds without ever leaving their chambers. Yet, despite their power, the Zephyrians were a race beset by isolation. The very abilities that made them formidable also made them feared, and in their long history, they had rarely found allies who could withstand the intensity of their minds. Diplomatic efforts often ended in disaster, with well-intentioned ambassadors fleeing in terror or succumbing to the overwhelming mental strain. The Zephyrians had learned to keep to themselves, their society flourishing in solitude, but always with the knowledge that true connection with another species might be forever out of reach. This was the backdrop against which Captain Alex Riker entered the scene. A man of unassuming appearance but remarkable depth, Riker was a diplomat unlike any other. His past as a soldier had given him a steely resolve, but it was his empathy that set him apart, a rare quality that had served him well in the delicate art of interspecies relations. Riker believed, above all, in the power of understanding. He had seen too many conflicts born of ignorance and fear, and he had dedicated his life to bridging the gaps between civilizations, no matter how vast or treacherous. When the call came to form an alliance with the Zephyrians, most of his peers balked at the idea. The risks were too great, the potential for catastrophe too high. But Riker saw an opportunity where others saw only danger. He knew that if there was any hope of connecting with the Zephyrians, it would require someone who could not only withstand their psychic force but also resonate with it on a fundamental level. It would require someone who could reach out to them not just with words, but with thoughts, emotions, and a genuine desire to understand. Riker's mission was clear: to make the first meaningful connection with a Zephyrian female. The stakes were immense. Success would mean forging an alliance that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Failure could mean not just his own demise, but the loss of a crucial opportunity for peace. The matriarchs had agreed to the meeting, intrigued by this human who dared to approach them, but they made no promises. The outcome rested entirely on Riker's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Zephyrian mind. As he prepared for the journey to the Zephyrian homeworld, Riker was well aware of the challenge ahead. He had studied their culture, learning all he could about their psychic abilities and the ways in which they communicated. He understood the risks, but he also understood the importance of his mission. This was not just about politics or power, It was about breaking down the barriers that had kept the Zephyrans isolated for so long. It was about showing them that they were not alone, that there were others in the galaxy who could meet them as equals, without fear or prejudice. And so, with a mixture of determination and trepidation, Riker embarked on his journey. The Zephyrian homeworld awaited, a place of beauty and danger, where the fate of an alliance would be decided not in words, but in the silent, powerful exchange of thoughts and emotions. As his ship hurtled through the stars, Riker steeled himself for what was to come. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he also knew that if anyone could succeed in this impossible task, it was him. The Zephyrians had remained isolated for too long. It was time for a change, and Captain Alex Riker was determined to be the one to make that change happen. The ship descended through the atmosphere of the Zephyrian homeworld, the planet revealing itself in all its otherworldly splendor. Lush forests of iridescent foliage stretched for miles, their colors shifting subtly as if responding to an unseen rhythm. Towering mountains, capped with crystalline formations, glimmered under a pale, ethereal sun that cast long shadows across the landscape. Yet, beneath the beauty, there was a palpable tension, an undercurrent of something ancient and powerful that made Riker's heart beat just a little faster. This was a world that demanded respect, where every element seemed to pulse with a silent, waiting energy. As the ship touched down on a platform surrounded by towering spires of dark stone, Riker took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of unknown blossoms, and the ground beneath his feet felt alive, almost as if it were aware of his presence. There was no grand reception, no welcoming committee, only the quiet hum of the ship's engines winding down and the distant calls of unseen creatures echoing in the distance. He adjusted his uniform and set off towards the entrance of the grand hall where the matriarchs awaited. The hall was a vast, circular chamber, its walls lined with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of long-forgotten battles and ancient rituals. The ceiling was domed, made of a translucent material that allowed the soft light of the sun to filter through, casting a serene glow over the room. But the tranquility was deceptive. As Riker entered, he felt a wave of pressure, as if the very air around him had thickened. It was not physical, but a mental force, a reminder of the psychic power that permeated this place. Seated on raised platforms arranged in a semicircle were the matriarchs, their presence commanding and their gazes unwavering. Each was adorned in elaborate robes that shimmered with subtle, shifting colors, reflecting the ever-changing flow of their psychic energy. Their faces were serene, but their eyes held a depth that spoke of centuries of knowledge and power. They did not speak aloud. Instead, their thoughts brushed against Riker's mind, a whisper of inquiry and judgment. "Captain Riker," one of the matriarchs projected, her voice resonating within his mind, clear and melodic yet carrying an edge of skepticism. "You come with intentions of forming an alliance, of bridging the gap between our races. But do you understand the risks you take? The connection you seek is not one that can be made lightly." Riker nodded, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. "I am aware of the risks, matriarchs. But I believe that understanding between our species is possible, and it begins with trust. I am here to earn that trust." The matriarchs exchanged glances, their thoughts intertwining in a silent conversation that Riker could only perceive as faint ripples in the psychic field around them. After a moment, the central matriarch inclined her head slightly, and from behind her stepped Lyria, the youngest of the council. Her presence was immediately noticeable, not because she lacked the gravitas of the others, but because her psychic energy was different, more intense, more focused. She was younger, yes, but her power was no less formidable. Lyria approached Riker, her eyes meeting his with a mix of curiosity and caution. There was a silence, both mental and physical, as they regarded each other. Then, without a word, Lyria extended her hand, not as a gesture of greeting, but as an invitation to begin the connection. Riker hesitated for only a moment before accepting, his hand enveloped in hers. The moment their hands touched, Riker felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if his mind was being drawn into a vast, swirling ocean of thoughts and emotions, each wave threatening to pull him under. Laraya's mind was powerful, her thoughts sharp and clear, but also layered with complexities that he struggled to grasp. He could feel her probing his consciousness, testing his resolve, searching for any sign of weakness. The strain was immediate and intense. Riker's vision blurred, and his thoughts scattered, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the connection. He fought to maintain focus, to keep his mind from fracturing under the pressure. He knew that this was a test, that Laraya was pushing him to his limits, and he could sense the matriarchs observing, their judgment hanging in the balance. But Riker did not back down. Gritting his teeth, he concentrated on the one thing that had always guided him, his empathy. He reached out, not with force, but with understanding, trying to align his thoughts with Laraya's, to find common ground amidst the chaos. He focused on his memories, on moments of connection with others, on the shared experiences that transcended species and cultures. Slowly, he felt the pressure ease, the swirling thoughts beginning to calm. Laraya's mind responded, her probing becoming less invasive, more exploratory. She began to share with him fragments of her own memories, glimpses of her life, her struggles, her aspirations. Riker could feel the loneliness she carried, the weight of expectations placed upon her as a powerful Zephyrine female. In that moment, he realized that despite the vast differences between them, there was something fundamentally human in her emotions. She, too, longed for connection, for understanding, just as he did. The connection deepened, becoming more mutual. Riker could sense the matriarch's intrigue growing, their skepticism giving way to a cautious curiosity. This human, against all odds, was holding his own. But the test was far from over. The initial connection was only the beginning, and Riker knew that the real challenge would be maintaining it, building upon it, and proving that this fragile link could become something more. As the session ended, Laraya released his hand, and the connection broke. Riker staggered slightly, feeling drained but not defeated. Laraya's expression was unreadable, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes, respect, perhaps, or at least recognition of his determination. The matriarchs remained silent, their thoughts still shielded from him, but Riker knew that he had made an impression. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The path ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with dangers both seen and unseen. But Riker was resolved. He had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. The future of the Alliance, and perhaps the galaxy itself, hinged on what would come next. Over the next few days, Riker and Laraya met repeatedly, each session a delicate dance of minds reaching out to one another. The initial tension between them began to soften as Riker approached each interaction with patience and empathy. He knew the key to bridging the vast divide between their species lay not in force or strategy, but in understanding. Slowly, he began to share more of himself, not just through words, but through thoughts and emotions carefully projected into the psychic space they now occupied. Riker drew on his past experiences, moments of connection he'd had with others across different worlds. He showed Laraya the memories of those who had trusted him, and the ways he had earned that trust, piece by piece. Laraya, in turn, began to lower her psychic defenses, allowing Riker to glimpse parts of her mind she had long kept hidden. It was not an easy process. For a Zephyrine, vulnerability was foreign, almost dangerous. Yet, with each session, Laraya let down her guard a little more, revealing fragments of her fears, her dreams, and the weight of expectations placed upon her. Laraya had always felt the pressure of her potential, the unspoken demand that she rise to the same heights as the matriarchs before her. The burden of leadership, the isolation that came with her power, it was a lonely path. Riker could sense this loneliness, and he responded not with pity, but with an understanding born of his own experiences. He knew what it was to bear the weight of responsibility, to feel disconnected from those around him. This shared understanding became the foundation upon which their trust was built. But the path to trust was fraught with challenges. The deeper their connection grew, the more Riker found himself struggling with the sheer intensity of Laraya's mind. Her thoughts were not just thoughts. They were raw, unfiltered energies that threatened to overwhelm him at every turn. At times, Riker would be plunged into vivid hallucinations, visions of Lyra's world seen through her eyes, but distorted by his own mind's inability to fully process the alien nature of her psyche. Other times, waves of emotion would crash over him without warning, threatening to drown him in fear, anger, or sorrow that wasn't entirely his own. There were moments when Riker considered backing away, retreating to the safety of his own mind. The psychic strain was immense, far beyond anything he had ever experienced. His team on the ship, monitoring his sessions from a distance, grew increasingly concerned. They saw the toll it was taking on him, the exhaustion, the moments of disorientation when he returned from each session, the way he sometimes winced as if in pain when no one was speaking. They began to whisper among themselves, debating whether they should intervene, whether this mission was worth the risk it was clearly posing to their captain's well-being. But Riker was resolute. He knew that this connection, fragile as it was, held the key to everything. And as much as he struggled, he wasn't alone. Lyra, sensing the difficulties he faced, began to adjust her approach. She tempered the intensity of her thoughts, guiding him gently through the labyrinth of her mind, helping him navigate the complexities that had initially overwhelmed him. Her assistance wasn't just practical, it was a sign that she, too, was committed to making this connection work. The trust they were building was no longer one-sided, it was becoming mutual. Then came the breakthrough, a moment that would change everything. During one of their sessions, as Riker and Lyra delved deeper into each other's minds, something shifted. The barriers that had always existed between them, subtle but persistent, suddenly began to dissolve. It was as if their minds, after so many attempts at bridging the gap, had finally found a way to merge, to truly understand one another. Riker felt himself being drawn into a place beyond thoughts, beyond words, a shared mental space where their core memories and emotions flowed freely between them. He saw Lyra's childhood, the first time she realized the extent of her psychic powers, the pride and fear in her parents' eyes. He felt her loneliness, the nights spent staring at the stars, wondering if there was anyone out there who could understand her. And in return, Lyra experienced Riker's memories, the camaraderie of his early years in the military, the loss of friends in battle, the relentless drive to prevent further conflict through diplomacy. She saw the weight of every decision he had ever made, the quiet moments of doubt, the determination that had brought him to this point. The emotional intensity of this shared experience was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. For the first time, Riker felt truly connected to Lyra, not just as a diplomat or a fellow sentient being, but as a friend, perhaps even more. And he knew that she felt the same. The connection they had forged went beyond the political or the practical. It was something deeper, something that neither of them had fully anticipated but that both of them now cherished. When the session ended, there was a profound silence between them, not out of awkwardness, but out of mutual understanding. They had seen each other's souls, so to speak, and in doing so, had formed a bond that was unbreakable. The matriarchs had been watching, of course, their presence always felt in the background, but even they seemed to acknowledge that something extraordinary had happened. For Riker and Lyra, this breakthrough was not the end of their journey, but it was a turning point. It was the moment when they stopped being merely representatives of their species and became something more, partners, allies, friends. The trust they had built, the challenges they had overcome, had led them to a place where true understanding was possible. And in that understanding lay the foundation for an alliance that could reshape the galaxy. Just as the connection between Riker and Lyra reached a new level of understanding, the Zephirian homeworld faced an unforeseen crisis. A rival alien faction, the Vorkar, had long coveted the psychic powers of the Zephirians, viewing them as both a threat and a resource to be exploited. For years, they had schemed from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had now arrived. Without warning, the skies above the Zephirian capital darkened as massive Vorkar warships descended, their weapons trained on the planet below. The initial barrage was devastating, targeting key infrastructure and psychic amplification centers that the Zephirians relied on for communication and defense. The ground shook as energy beams sliced through the air, leaving destruction in their wake. The matriarchs, taken by surprise, scrambled to respond, their minds reaching out in desperation to rally their people. Riker, still recovering from the intense connection with Lyria, was thrust into the heart of this crisis. He quickly realized the gravity of the situation. If the Vorkar succeeded in their invasion, the entire Zephirian race could be enslaved or eradicated, and any hope for the alliance he had worked so hard to build would be lost. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure was not an option. Lyria, her psychic abilities now fully awakened, stood beside Riker, her expression determined but tinged with fear. The bond they had forged was strong, but now it would be tested like never before. They had to act quickly, combining their strengths to repel the invaders. The matriarchs, sensing the unique connection between Riker and Lyria, deferred to them, trusting that their partnership held the key to survival. As the Vorkar forces advanced, Riker and Lyria moved into action. Riker's tactical mind went into overdrive, analyzing the enemy's movements and identifying weak points in their formation. He knew that brute force alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to outthink the Vorkar, using every resource at their disposal. Lyria, meanwhile, reached out with her mind, amplifying her psychic energy to coordinate the efforts of the Zephirian defenders. Her presence in their minds brought calm and focus, enabling them to fight with a unity they had never achieved before. Together, Riker and Lyria devised a plan. Riker suggested using the planet's unique psychic energy fields as a weapon, something the Vorkar would never expect. By channeling the collective psychic power of the Zephirians through Lyria, they could create a massive energy pulse capable of disabling the enemy's technology. It was a risky move. Such a pulse could easily backfire, causing catastrophic damage to the planet itself, but it was their best shot at turning the tide. With the matriarch's approval, the plan was set into motion. Riker coordinated the ground forces, ensuring that key positions were held and that the Vorkar were drawn into the trap. Lyria, meanwhile, connected with every Zephirian on the planet, forming a psychic network of unimaginable scale. As the Vorkar ships descended lower, confident in their impending victory, Riker gave the signal. Lyria, standing at the center of the psychic nexus, unleashed the full force of the Zephirians' collective power. The energy pulse surged outward, an invisible wave that swept through the atmosphere, striking the Vorkar ships with pinpoint precision. Systems overloaded, weapons malfunctioned, and the once imposing warships began to falter. But the strain on Lyria was immense. Riker could feel it through their connection. The sheer force of the psychic energy threatened to tear her apart, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might be consumed by it. In that critical moment, Riker made a decision. Reaching out with his mind, he joined Lyria in the psychic nexus, sharing the burden of the energy pulse. It was a gamble. His human mind was not built to withstand such forces, but he knew that without his support, Lyria might not survive. Together, they channeled the energy, guiding it with precision, until the Vorkar ships, now crippled, began to retreat. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The remaining Zephirian forces, inspired by the display of power and unity, pressed the attack, driving the Vorkar back into space. As the last of the invaders fled, Riker and Lyria collapsed, utterly spent but victorious. The connection between them, now tested by fire, had held strong, and through it, they had saved an entire race from destruction. In the aftermath, the Zephirian capital lay in ruins, but the people were safe, and the threat had been repelled. Riker and Lyria, though physically and mentally exhausted, had proven that their bond was more than just a diplomatic success. It was a force capable of changing the course of history. The matriarchs, acknowledging this, formally welcomed Riker as a friend and ally of the Zephirian people, and the alliance between their species was sealed in a way that no one had thought possible. But the victory came at a cost. Riker's mind bore the scars of the psychic battle, and Lyria's powers had been pushed to their limits. They had won, but both knew that the true test of their connection, and of the alliance, was still to come. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and this was only the beginning. But for now, they had achieved the impossible, and together, they would face whatever came next. In the aftermath of the battle, the Zephirian homeworld began its slow recovery. The once pristine capital bore the scars of the conflict, with structures damaged and the landscape marred by the fierce exchange. Yet, despite the destruction, there was a sense of triumph in the air. The Zephyrans, a race known for their isolation, had faced a dire threat and emerged victorious, not just through their own strength, but through an alliance that had once seemed impossible. The news of the victory spread quickly, both on the planet and across the galaxy. Riker found himself at the center of this attention, hailed as a hero by the Zephyrans and his own people alike. The Zephyrans, who had once viewed humans with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, now looked upon Riker with deep respect. He had done what no other had managed. He had bridged the gap between their species, not with force, but with understanding and trust. His name became synonymous with the new alliance, a symbol of what could be achieved when differences were embraced rather than feared. For Riker, however, the accolades meant little compared to the bond he had forged with Lyria. She had become more than just an ally, she was a partner, someone who had shared her mind and soul with him in a way that few could ever comprehend. As the planet began to rebuild, Riker knew that his time there was drawing to a close. His mission had been a success, but it was time for him to return to his own people, to continue his work in fostering peace across the stars. The final moments between Riker and Lyria were tinged with a bittersweet sense of inevitability. They stood together on a quiet hill overlooking the capital, the sky above them beginning to clear as the planet's natural beauty slowly reasserted itself. The bond they had created was powerful, a connection that transcended the physical and the mental, yet they both understood that it was something unique, something that might never be fully understood by others. Lyria looked at Riker, her expression unreadable but her eyes reflecting the depth of her feelings. "What we've accomplished," she said softly, "it's something that will change the future of our worlds. But it's also something that belongs to us alone. No one else will truly know what we shared, and perhaps that's how it should be." Riker nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I couldn't have done this without you, Lyria. Whatever happens next, know that you've made a difference, not just for your people, but for all of us." There was a pause, a moment where words seemed inadequate. Then, without another word, they embraced, not as representatives of their species, but as two beings who had found a connection in a universe that often felt cold and distant. When they finally parted, there was a sense of finality, but also of peace. They had accomplished something extraordinary, and that would remain with them, no matter where their paths led next. As Riker prepared to leave the Zephyrian homeworld, his thoughts turned to the broader implications of what had been achieved. The alliance between humans and Zephyrians was more than just a political or military victory. It was a new beginning. The cooperation between their species opened doors to possibilities that had previously been unimaginable. Other races, long divided by fear and misunderstanding, might now see the potential for unity rather than conflict. The galaxy, vast and filled with countless different cultures, was beginning to feel just a little bit smaller, a little more connected. Riker knew that his success here would not be the end of his work. If anything, it was only the beginning. There were still many challenges to face, many more bridges to build between the stars. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a genuine sense of hope. He had seen what was possible when trust and empathy were allowed to flourish, and he knew that the future could be bright if others were willing to follow the same path. As his ship lifted off, Riker took one last look at the planet below, now bathed in the soft light of a new dawn. The journey had been difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it had also been deeply rewarding. In that moment, he reflected on what it truly meant to connect with someone so different yet so alike. It was about seeing beyond the surface, beyond the fear and the differences, and recognizing the shared humanity, or sentience, that lay beneath. It was about understanding that, despite all the barriers, real connection was possible if only one was willing to take the risk. With that thought, Riker turned his gaze to the stars, ready to continue his mission. The universe was vast, but now, it felt just a little bit more welcoming, a little less lonely. And as his ship disappeared into the darkness, he knew that wherever he went next, he would carry the lessons of this journey with him, lessons of trust, connection, and the power of understanding that could change the fate of worlds.